What happens when a former TV news anchor joins the other side and starts a campaign to tell the truth? Well, the left freaks out and does everything it can to shut him up. They swatted him. They condemned him on social media. They did everything they could to silence him. It didn't work.
Your show's a big hit. It's a big success. You do fantastically. Your ratings are great, and we're very proud of you.
This is Unshaken and Unafraid with Joe Pags.
He's a world-renowned lawyer. He's an attorney that many think we found out about during the O.J. Simpson trial. I don't think so. I knew about Alan Dershowitz way before then. I want to get in depth with the man and find out exactly why he chose this field, which is perfect for him. But by the way, Professor, thanks so much for always making time for us. Welcome.
I love being on your show. You always ask the best questions and you have the best audiences. So I look forward to being on your show.
Well, I appreciate you making time for us today. I want to start from the start. I'm a New York guy. I'm from Long Island. I assume you're from New York. Are you from the city?
I'm from Brooklyn. I grew up in Borough Park, a modern Orthodox community in Brooklyn, born to parents and grandparents who had come over from the old country. Grew up in a neighborhood that was half Jewish, half Italian.
Wow.
And fought all the time as to who had the better food. And we finally resolved that the Jews had better breakfast with bagels and lox, the Italians and we could disagree about lunch.
You know, it's funny because we're very, very similar people. Of course, I'm Italian, and my grandfather came over on a boat in 28 or something. And, I mean, you come from the old country, you bring all the traditions, then you become a melting pot and make Western civilization even better on this side of the pond. But Jewish and Italian people have always gotten along. My best friend growing up was Stephen Ritter, who was a Jewish guy who actually, they put up a Christmas tree to make me feel comfortable when I came over and visited. I found it to be very, very, very endearing. So you grow up in a neighborhood like that, and in the day that you came over, or that the day that you were growing up, your parents came over, everybody worked hard. Like you were growing up, and my grandfather said of his 8 children, you're going to be the mechanic, you're going to be the manager, you're going to be the person who works with his hands, you're going to be the person who fixes TVs. In your family, was it similar to that? Alan, when you grow up, you're going to be this, or were you able to choose your field?
Well, I never chose my field at all. Everybody told me from the time I was 5 that I was going to be a lawyer. My yeshiva, and my rabbi called me in one day and said, you know, you got a good mouth on you, but you don't really have a good brain. So you should do something that use your mouth, but not your brain. He said, you could either be a lawyer or a conservative rabbi. He hated conservative rabbis because he was Orthodox. I wasn't smart enough to be a rabbi, so I became a lawyer, but I've been arguing all my life. I was a terrible student in elementary school and high school. I barely made it into college. Then I was first in my class. Brooklyn College, first in my class at Yale Law School. I just naturally took to law, and I love it, and I've been practicing it now for over 60 years, and I don't regret a day. Well, I regret a couple of days of it. I regret meeting Jeffrey Epstein. I regret a few things, but not too many.
It's Professor Alan Dershowitz. This is the new book, The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. Alan Dershowitz, the #1 New York Times bestselling author. Of course, we're happy to have him here. Introduction is done by retired Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. As you're growing up and you start, really excelling at law, what was it about the law? Was it about arguing? Because I like to debate and argue too, so I think that I've chosen a pretty good field, especially with the voice I have. But I always thought that I could have been a lawyer, but I think there's much more to it than just arguing. Was it the fact that the Constitution spelled things out so well? Was it a protection of individual liberties given by the Creator? What was it about it that said this is the right way to go?
Constitution doesn't spell it out well. This is my favorite cartoon. It's hanging in my office. It has one of the framers saying, just for fun, let's make what isn't constitutional kind of wishy-washy. And that's what they've done. Not clear, but it's a great document. Look, I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust. Lots of my family died in the death camps in Europe. And for me, being a lawyer and fighting against injustice and defending the underdog and making sure that nothing like this could ever happen again, going down south and fighting for the rights of African Americans, fighting for the rights of other people. I was always a human rights advocate, a civil liberties advocate, and a civil rights advocate. I now hate those terms. I never use the term human rights, civil rights, or civil liberties because they have been hijacked by the hard left and turned against Americans and Christians and Jews and Israel. And so I'm fighting to restore those terms. But right now, if you hear somebody saying human rights, they're going to immediately say Israel's guilty of genocide, or civil liberties, Israel's guilty of apartheid. They've been weaponizing it almost exclusively against Israel, against the United States, against Western values. And the hard left has been disgracing the Constitution. And that's why I'm in favor of the president having some impact on what's going on in universities. I'm writing a new book. It's called Trump to Harvard. And the title is Go Fund Yourself. So I'm in favor of some restrictions. I don't want to see restrictions on cancer research or Alzheimer's research or anything like that, but I want to see no funding of this political nonsense that they now call higher education, but is largely propaganda.
It's Professor Alan Dershowitz. Go and get this new book. It's called The Preventive State. And again, anything that you write, I make sure that I take in. Go check out The Dersh Show. It's over on Rumble. Go to dersh.substack.com. Anything that he does, go and take it in. When you started being a lawyer, when you became a lawyer, did you pass the bar the first time, first of all?
Oh, yeah. No, I was always a great student when it came to law school. I was first in my class at Yale Law School. I was editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal. I was a Supreme Court law clerk. I got the highest grade in the bar exam in District of Columbia. So I was always a great exam taker. That doesn't mean I'd be a good lawyer. I don't think grades are the best predictor of what kind of a lawyer or what kind of an anything somebody would be. But I did very, very well on my exams. And, my children and grandchildren have. I have a daughter who finished first in her class in law school, a grandson who finished first in his class in medical school, a granddaughter who finished first in her class at Harvard. So I've been blessed, I think, with my mother's genes. My mother didn't go to college, but she was the smartest person in the history of my family.
Well, I think it's amazing, and it's a great lineage, certainly. When you get your law degree and you pass the bar and you decide, I'm going to do this, I haven't been in this position, so is there a toss-up? I'm going to be a prosecutor. I'm going to go and take down these bad guys that commit crimes. I'm going to be a defense attorney because I think that everybody deserves, Sixth and Eighth Amendment rights to have proper, representation. What made you decide you would be on the defense side? Were you ever on the prosecution side?
I once took one case. I was asked to come in and try to prosecute a former FBI agent who had protected Whitey Bulger. So I did that. But I've been a defense lawyer. I never had a problem about choosing whether I'd be a defense lawyer, a criminal, or a prosecutor. I did have a problem deciding whether I wanted to be a practicing lawyer, a professor, a writer, and I resolved that problem by becoming all of them. And, I've been a professor. I think the reason I was a good professor is I brought the courtroom into the classroom. The reason I was a good courtroom lawyer is I brought the classroom into the courtroom. And I think combining practice and theory is the best key to success in almost any profession.
The name of the book is The Preventive State. Go and get it now. The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties by Alan Dershowitz, my special guest today. I want to bring up the way that the Constitution sets up our government. The Article 1, of course, is the legislature. Article 2 is the executive. Article 3 is the judicial branch. Those who are on the conservative side, like I am, but I'm taking their word for it. I didn't make this decision on my own. There's a reason why it was 1, 2, and 3. Do you believe that the legislative branch is the most important and that the judicial branch is sort of the last bastion to make sure that things that we're doing are constitutional? Does the order they were made matter to you?
Does, but the only thing I disagree with is I think you can do that if you're a liberal. Thomas Jefferson attacked the judiciary. He refused to appoint John Adams' midnight appointments. He thought the courts were totally undemocratic. He wanted everything to be done by elected officials, especially legislatures. So I think that's the democratic approach, is to focus on Article 1 and to think of Article 3 as simply a check and balance on the elected branches of government.
Do you think, as we're watching it, how it's unfolding today, because we really do have kind of a constitutional crisis? I know that that's something that the liberals throw out a lot to scare us, but we truly do. We have to make a decision as to whether the Article 3, the judicial branch, and only the Supreme Court is mentioned. The Congress makes every other branch, every other court that's out there. We have to make a decision. They have the right to tell the executive what they can and can't do on foreign and domestic issues. Do you find it to be a constitutional crisis right now? Is it as dire as it seems in the media, or are we working it out?
We're working it out. It's not a crisis. It's a conflict. Okay. We've had only constitutional crises in our history. One, when Andrew Jackson refused to accept the decision of the Supreme Court on how Native Americans should be treated, and second, Dred Scott, which obviously led to the Civil War. The rest have all been constitutional conflicts. Jefferson's fight with Adams, Roosevelt's fight, even Lincoln's suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. Those were all constitutional conflicts that were resolved. I just finished writing an op-ed today, literally 15 minutes before I came on your show, saying, how do we resolve this constitutional conflict about birthright citizenship? And it's very easy. Have the legislature define who's subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And if illegal alien babies who were born here and go back to their country quickly are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, then they're not citizens. So I think we can resolve that. Even nationwide injunctions, we can resolve that. We can create a legislative court that to which all nationwide injunctions have to be brought. So there are so many ways under our system of checks and balances of dealing with these constitutional conflicts, and that's why we've had so few constitutional crises, and we're not in one now. As long as President Trump stands by his word and says, I will not defy an order of the Supreme Court, which he has said, then we're not in a crisis. We're in a conflict, and we have the mechanisms for resolving it.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, my special guest today. His book is called The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. Out now. Go and get it. I'm glad you brought up the 14th Amendment, because I do want to break that down a little bit further, if you don't mind. So they put it in there. Obviously, it's post-Civil War. Obviously, it's to make sure that those who are slaves do have full citizenship rights. It had nothing to do with somebody coming across the border into Laredo and having a baby, and then suddenly the baby is a citizen. But because there was a fear that it would be looked at that way, I thought Senator Howard from Michigan literally said, we've got to add, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, this will clear it up. And but what you said at the beginning of this conversation, Professor, is so true. They purposely made it completely vague. So what does the subject to the jurisdiction thereof actually mean? That I'm in the country, I'm legally in the country, and all the laws apply to me? Or does it mean something else?
There are so many different possible interpretations. For example, if you're the child of a diplomat born in the United States and you go back to your country after being a year in the country in the United States, you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and therefore you're not a citizen, in my view, under the 14th Amendment. But I think legislation is needed to clarify that. I don't think the president or the courts alone can redefine citizenship in a way to eliminate. Look, let's start with the obvious point. Birthright citizenship is just stupid. The idea that anybody just who happens to be born in the United States, or people who come over the border to have a child born here and then leave to have that child be a citizen, is just dumb. It's not what was intended by the framers, and it's not. Now the question is, how do we avoid it? And the way of avoiding it is through legislation, saying that certain people are not subject to the jurisdiction. Diplomats' children are not subject to the jurisdiction. And then we can say people who are born to illegal immigrants, who then are here for only a short period of time, are not subject to the jurisdiction. It's complicated, because what if somebody is born to illegal parents, illegal immigrant parents, who then's here 5 years or 10 years, and maybe they are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. But it's a quintessentially legislative judgment, and it should be made by Congress rather than by the president or by the courts.
So if I'm hearing you right, in essence, the Congress would come up with a bill or an act that says, if you're born in this country and you're here for 5 years, 10 years, whatever the number is, then you can get full citizenship rights. Instead of, as you said, somebody comes here, has a baby, then suddenly chain migration happens. Well, we've got an American citizen in our family now, baby whomever is a citizen, therefore grandma gets to come, grandpa gets to come, uncle whomever gets to come. So in other words, the actual chronological stipulation of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. That would solve all that.
Makes sense. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it goes a long way towards solving the problems and resolving the conflict that we now have. So I'm hoping right now, Congress is sitting on its hands. Right now, we have a conflict. We have a president who's pushed the envelope, tested his constitutional powers beyond anything since Franklin Roosevelt, Lincoln, many of them did that. But this president in modern times has pressed the envelope very far, and the judiciary has fought back. So right now we have a conflict between the judicial branches and the executive branch. But where's the legislative branch? They can resolve many of these conflicts. Take, for example, the issue of nationwide injunctions. Very simple. You create a new court, much like the FISA court, consisting of 5 judges from all over the country. And if you want to apply for a nationwide injunction, you have to go to that court. It makes the decision, and then it's immediately appealable to the Supreme Court. That way you don't have 25 different district court judges rendering 25 different decisions and confusing everybody. You don't have judge shopping. So there's a legislative solution to this, and the legislature has to get off its hands and start making these kinds of decisions. On the issue of deportation, for example, there's so much the legislature can do. You know, you mentioned my book, The Preventive State. One of the major mechanisms of prevention now is deportation. We deport people who belong to gangs because we want to prevent them from committing serious crimes. We're now in a debate over whether we should bomb Iran's nuclear reactors. That's preventive. So, you know, we're living in the preventive state, and yet we don't have a jurisprudence for how to avoid making mistakes. Look, if we could have prevented 9/11, if Israel could have prevented October 7th, if we could have prevented Pearl Harbor, even if it required some locking up some people who maybe would have been innocent, or even killing some people who might have been innocent. Look, one of the examples I give in my book, The Preventive State, is if France and England had attacked Germany in 1935 and destroyed the Nazi regime, maybe they would have killed 10,000 people. They would have saved 50 million people. They could have prevented the Second World War. So we sometimes make mistakes by going too far in making preventive action. Sometimes we may make mistakes by not going far enough. And in my book, I try very hard to create a balanced jurisprudence which tells us when we should act and when we shouldn't act. And these are issues as current as deportation, what we deal with when we have an epidemic, when do we mandate inoculation. Those are all preventive measures that we have to think about more, and I tried very hard to do that in my book.
Go get the book right now. It's called The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. It's from Professor Alan Dershowitz. I want to take you back to the past again if we can. Was there a case, well there was obviously, that you realized to yourself, wow, I just sort of made my mark. People now understand that I'm pretty good at this, and you sort of started getting fame. It wasn't O.J. Simpson. It had to be something well before then, because I knew who you were well before that trial ever happened. What was the one case that you could point to that sort of made your mark and people said, oh, that Dershowitz is pretty good?
I think it was probably the Klaus von Bülow case, where everybody said he was guilty and he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. And I got it reversed, and then on a new trial, we got him acquitted. I think that was the case that brought me to being well known. But I had done other cases before that. I had defended Harry Reams, the first porno star who was convicted of being in a pornographic film. I had defended the Jewish Defense League when they were accused of planting bombs against the Soviet Union. I had defended Patricia Hearst for the kidnapping. So, you know, I had a lot of good wins. And I was lucky that, you know, I've had a good record. I've won most of my murder cases on appeal. And you know, I'm 86 now, and I'm still litigating, and I'm still writing. This is my 57th book. My wife calls it the Heinz book, you know, 57 flavors. And, you know, I've had like 350 cases, and I've had a really good record of winning. And then 60 years of teaching. You know, part of me wishes I was back at Harvard to fight with the administration and to fight with the students. I would spend all of my time fighting with them, because I can't stand what's going on at American universities, which have become propaganda mills, where teachers think their job is to teach students what to think instead of how to think. You know, in my 60 years, I never expressed a personal view in a class, never once. People didn't know what my personal views were on capital punishment, on bail, or any of those things. I would be the devil's advocate. I would fight with people, like Ted Cruz. He would be in the class, and we would fight like children. Jamie Raskin. I've had so many well-known people who take different views than me, and I would always take the devil's advocate view and present a different point of view. And my classes were popular for that reason, because students could never predict what my personal views were. They would guess at it all the time. And after class, they would come over and say, "But what do you think? What do you think?" And I would say, "Well, read my articles, read my books. You'll find out what I think, but you're not going to learn what I think in the classroom."
Yeah, you got to go and get this book. It's called The Preventive State. It's from Professor Alan Dershowitz. I think I asked you this before, but I want to ask it again. Did the 14th Amendment do away with the 10th Amendment? Here's why I ask. The first 9 are pretty much in stone. The 10th Amendment says, okay, we covered everything the federal government can do here in the first 9. Anything that doesn't apply there goes back to the states. The 14th Amendment seems to say, yeah, but due process for everybody, and equal treatment under the law. Therefore, you states don't really have the rights. We're gonna get all that power back to the central government. So, simple question, kind of complicated answer, I guess. Does the 14th do away with the 10th?
Well, boy, if you were in my class, you would get the A+. What a great question.
Thank you.
It's really, really a good question. I think the answer is in part. It constrains what states can do. And it basically says, look, we say under the 10th Amendment, if nothing else prohibits it, then it's up to the states. But the 14th Amendment says certain things are prohibited. And so it constrains the 10th Amendment. But, Alexander Hamilton didn't think that you needed a Bill of Rights, because he said there's nothing in the Constitution itself without a Bill of Rights that gives Congress the authority to regulate religion or to regulate speech or to do all those things. Hamilton was wrong. I mean, it was important to create rights like the right against cruel and unusual punishment, the right against self-incrimination, the right not to have houses searched without a warrant. It was kind of a safety net, belts and suspenders, and I think the Bill of Rights has done us a lot of good over the years. Almost nobody loves every Bill of Rights. I'm not myself a big supporter, a big fan of the Second Amendment, perhaps because I was brought up in Brooklyn where we didn't have guns. We didn't know what guns were. I never fired a gun. And other people say, oh, we love the Second Amendment. It's more important than the First Amendment. But the Bill of Rights as a whole, I wouldn't tamper it. I wouldn't touch it. I would keep it the way it is. And the Constitution in general has survived. 225 years. No other Constitution in the history of the world has ever endured like ours has. And with only 24 amendments, it's absolutely remarkable. And we're never going to have another amendment unless it's a technical amendment. We'll never get the kind of 2/3, 3/4 that you need to amend the Constitution. So we're stuck with the Constitution the way it is. And if you're going to be stuck with anything, pretty darn good document.
No, I agree with you. 13, 14, and 15, though, were specifically about the end of slavery, the end of the Civil War. And again, the 14th Amendment, I think in a very general sense, was about making sure that former slaves had equal due process as everybody else. But was it really about gay marriage? Was it really about abortion? Was the 5th and the 14th really about abortion? It's almost like we've stretched these amendments as far as we can. Weren't there supposed to be some restraints on how far they could go with these amendments?
I'll go even further. The 14th and 13th and 15th Amendments was not about desegregation. If you had told framers of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that it requires young black children to go to school with young white children, it wouldn't have passed. Brown versus Board of Education is not consistent with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They really did believe in separate but equal. Abraham Lincoln believed in separate but equal. He believed in actually sending many black people back to Africa. He thought that would be good for them. He thought that would be good for America. But, we're an evolving country and we change things. And obviously, none of the framers thought about abortion. None of the framers thought about gay rights. Can you imagine the debate back in 1863? Should transgender boys be allowed to compete in volleyball games? That played by girls, it would be unheard of and unthinkable. So, the Constitution clearly is an evolving doctrine. Anthony Scalia was a good friend of mine. I knew his father when I was a student at Brooklyn College, so we became good friends. And we fought like children. I remember sitting in Jerusalem, looking literally at where, Jesus was crucified, and fighting and arguing about religion and fighting about the Constitution. And Scalia loved to confront people like me and say, it's a dead Constitution. It's dead. It's not a living Constitution. It's only what they meant back in 1793. Nothing more, nothing less. And, I said, what about Brown versus Board of Education? And he would say, oh, you got me on that one. I can't be. When he first got on the Supreme Court, he called me. And he asked me if he could come to my class because he heard I had been critical of some of the decisions he had written. And he came to my class and we debated for 2 hours.
I love that. It is Alan Dershowitz. Go to dersh.substack.com. Also, get this brand new book called The Preventive States, the latest one from the New York Times bestselling author Alan Dershowitz, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. Let's talk about due process. Oh, my God. We're all talking about due process now. Abrego Garcia, he deserves due process. For my money, somebody who's here illegally and adjudicated to be here illegally got due process. He asked for asylum. It was denied. The only place you couldn't send him was El Salvador. For some reason, the Trump administration sent him to El Salvador. But we called him a terrorist guy, but we're using the Alien Enemies Act from 1798 or whatever the hell it was. So talk to me about due process. The Fifth Amendment appears to prevent states from not giving you due process. The 14th Amendment appears to be something much more broad than that. Do people who come here illegally, do they get the same due process as Alan Dershowitz and Joe Pagliarulo?
Exactly the key point. Again, you're the A+ student. They get due process, which means they get the process that's due to them based on their status. So that if you and I get arrested and we're charged with a serious crime, we get the right of an indictment, we get the right of counsel, we get the right of confrontation and cross-examination, we get the right not to be searched, we get every single conceivable right because we are citizens and we're charged with a crime. If you're here as a student visa, all of the due process you're entitled to is you're entitled to prove you're here properly on a student visa. You're entitled to argue that you didn't violate the terms of the visa, but you get very little due process. And for example, if you're caught sneaking over the border and you're a half a mile into Texas and you're caught, you get no process. You just get taken over the border and put back on the other side. By the way, that's not true of Cubans. Cuban refugees, under a special provision, it was called the 1 foot rule. If you set 1 foot into the United States, you get to stay here, at least until you have due process. So due process means the process that's due you based on who you are, what your status is, what you're accused of, and what the government wants to do with you. It is not a singular concept. It's a variable concept depending on many, many factors. And so the same due process that we get are not accorded to people who are charged with being here illegally.
I'm from New York originally, but I grew up in South Florida. We had wet foot, dry foot, which literally meant if your feet were still in the ocean, you couldn't come in. If your feet were on the beach, you could now be taken as a refugee either from Haiti or from Cuba. In fact, we did it much wiser back in 1980 with the Mariel boat lift when Fidel Castro let all those people out of his prison, sent them north 90 miles. They all ended up in Miami. Well, we put them in a detention center, which is the only process they got. We got to figure out who the heck you are. So why do you think, Professor, I don't think they're stupid people. I don't think Chris Van Hollen is a dumb guy. But why do you think they're pretending this guy, Abrego Garcia or Mahmoud Khalil, very different cases, why they didn't get proper due process? Like you said, with a student visa, Khalil allegedly lied on his visa application. He can get sent back anytime by Marco Rubio. But the Abrego Garcia guy was adjudicated here illegally, adjudicated MS-13 member by 2 different judges. Why are they still pretending he didn't get due process, flying to El Salvador to have lunch with the guy to pretend like he's somehow sympathetic?
Well, even the Supreme Court was wrong about that case because they didn't realize that he was not allowed to stay in the United States. He just couldn't be sent to a particular country. He has no right to be in the United States. So, for example, instead of flying him back to the United States, the Supreme Court could have said, you're entitled to go to the American Embassy, have a Zoom hearing, with an immigration judge, make your case why you can't be allowed to be sent to El Salvador, Nicaragua, or Guatemala, and we'll do whatever is necessary, but you have no right to come back to the United States. The Supreme Court was wrong about that. I don't think they had carefully studied the briefs, but that came as close to being a constitutional crisis because the Supreme Court did say mistakenly that the president must facilitate his return to the United States. I don't think that was right. All they should have said was he should facilitate his right to challenge his deportation to El Salvador. That's all he had the right to do under the previous decisions. And, I think as long as you can demonstrate that he likely was a gang member. Look, I have a plan for how to deal with this, and I'm not the only one who has this plan. If you have probable cause that a person's in the country illegally, probable cause like you get for a search warrant, you can deport the person and then give him a chance to challenge that deportation by Zoom from the American embassy or anywhere else. And then if he wins, he gets back to the United States. But he doesn't come to the United States in order to challenge. That's why God invented Zoom. So we don't have to have for every single case. I've argued cases on Zoom. And if you can argue cases on Zoom for American citizens, why can't you argue cases for Zoom on people who are presumptively illegal?
Well, what you're saying is something nobody else has said, and I think that it makes perfect sense. The allegation from the Chris Van Hollens of the world and the Jamie Raskins of the world, to be honest, is that for some reason they have the right to come back on this soil, which I agree with you. You have been adjudicated. You got due process. No, your asylum claim has been denied, and you're going to get deported. Deport you, and now if you want to challenge it, like you said, you could do it over the internet. You could do it from the embassy. Do it where, but they want us to believe that somehow they have the right to be on this soil. Why do you think that is?
Well, because the Democrats have made a political point of it. Remember, too, that 90% of cases about asylum are turned down. That is, the vast, vast majority of people seeking asylum are doing it only to gain time. They don't have legitimate asylum claims. Only about 10 or 11% of asylum claims are granted after full hearings and full opportunities to present all the evidence. So the vast majority of immigration lawyers who claim that their clients are subject to asylum claims are doing it just to gain time. Just because they know it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years to adjudicate this. They know they're going to lose, and they do lose, but they're doing it only to gain time. And the bar associations haven't said anything about the misuses of the asylum mechanism in order to gain time alone. To me, that raises an ethical question. I wouldn't bring an asylum case on behalf of somebody who I thought didn't have a legitimate asylum claim only to gain time for him to stay in the United States, knowing inevitably he'd lose his case.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, get his new book called The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. Go and get it right now. It's his latest offering, and working on other books as well, and we'll have you back on when you do those. Let's talk about January 6th. I think you and I can agree it was not by definition an insurrection. It was a riot. It was vandalism. People did break the law that day. But, Professor, I truly don't believe that those people got Sixth or Eighth Amendment rights to proper process, to proper representation, to bail. Some people were just locked up in some clink in D.C. for years in solitary confinement just because they could be. Did those people get their rights?
Absolutely not. I agree with you 100%. I took one of those cases involving a law student who came to protest. He honestly believed the election was stolen. I disagreed with him. We argued about it, but he had the right to make that claim. He came to Washington, D.C. He was standing in front of the Capitol, and he saw the police waving him in, and he was waved into the Capitol. He stayed there for about 15 minutes, and then he left, and he was arrested, charged with a felony. His law degree was withheld. We won the case eventually, but it was very, very difficult, and it ruined his opportunity to practice law right away and to go into business. And he's a really terrific, decent guy, and I was very pleased to represent him. He was lucky. We won that case. Other cases, obviously, people were in prison for long periods of time without due process. And so, yeah, no, I think there was tremendous overreaction to January 11th. I agree with you. January 11th was not our finest hour. And I think people should have been prosecuted if they broke things, if they broke in, if they broke windows, if they hurt anybody, any of that. But if they just protested and it got out of hand, that's not an insurrection. It's not even close to an insurrection. It's a protest went bad.
Professor, I have the right to say I think the election was stolen, don't I? Now, I'm not saying that I think it was, but don't I inherently have that right to say it?
And, I've been criticized because I said that I believe that the Pennsylvania vote was unconstitutional. I don't think the election was stolen, but I think the Pennsylvania vote was unconstitutional. Boy, have I been criticized even for suggesting that. So, no, you have a right to say, you have a right more. You have a right to come and hold signs and scream and yell in front of Congress saying this was stolen, stolen, stolen. You have a right to do all those things as long as you don't incite violence or engage in violence. And so we went much too far in trying to suppress freedom of speech. Look, and if you think the election was stolen and you say that, you should be held accountable for your views, and people might not want to vote for you if you run for Congress and might not want to hire you if you're doing a talk show. That's right. Within the right. But you have the right to express your views. My client, honestly, to this day, believed the election was stolen, and he was wrong. I was right. There are occasions where he might be right and I might be wrong, and that's what the marketplace of ideas is all about.
Is there a legal angle to the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop was hidden? Here's what I mean. Study after study shows anywhere between 10 and 16% would have voted differently in 2020. So I agree with you that it wasn't stolen, but many are now saying it was rigged because the complicit media and social media literally shut down the New York Post. They shut down the story that said the FBI had this laptop for a year and verified that it was in fact Hunter Biden's laptop. Is there any legal ramification or legal, some sort of a legal solution, knowing that happened and it did in fact sway how that vote went?
I don't think there is a legal. There is a political solution. The political solution came to be in 2024 when people voted for Donald Trump. But you don't have a legal claim against the media for misleading. If not, the New York Times would be out of business. They are guilty of more misleading because they have the lowest ratio to credibility to real credibility, apparent credibility. People believe it, all the news that's fit to print. But in my experience, the New York Times has been a disaster. Let me give you an example. The book, The Preventive State, is my most important book. The New York Times has reviewed every one of my books until I defended Donald Trump. The day I defended Donald Trump, they exiled me and they canceled me, and they will not review my book, The Preventive State. They will not interview me, and that's the New York Times. Fortunately, we have other newspapers that will do that. But the New York Times is a disgrace. CNN, the same thing. They will not mention my book or interview me, and that doesn't deprive me as much as it does my readers and my listeners. They don't hear my voice if they listen to CNN or if they read the New York Times. I was the most frequent op-ed writer of any lawyer in the history of the New York Times until I defended Donald Trump. They haven't published a single op-ed of mine since the day I defended Donald Trump, nor have they interviewed me since that time. They decided to cut me off completely because I exercise a constitutional right to defend somebody against an unconstitutional impeachment. That's the New York Times.
The Preventive State, the challenge of preventing serious harms while preserving essential liberties, by Alan Dershowitz, my guest today. The story is more about censorship, though. And I know Section 230 gets into the weeds, and I think that was a Reagan-era thing that didn't really mean the internet and all this. But we know that Jack Dorsey and Twitter they actually shut down the New York Post's ability to say anything. I could not send you a direct message with the New York Post link to say, hey, Alan, look at this. You're not going to believe what that would happen with this laptop. Is there anything to that in the fact that they colluded in such a way? They weren't just, the media can lie. They have the right to lie. It's up to me to figure out if they're lying and maybe go fact check them. But if you prevent somebody from actually showing what they've researched and developed, and it's on a platform that invited the New York Post to go and take part, is there anything there? Are they allowed? Can any platform just shut it down? Because they were acting as a publisher that day, and they promised they wouldn't act like a publisher, that they would just be a platform. Is there any angle there that this collusion between Facebook and Twitter and all and YouTube and Google all shut this story down. Is there anything there, or just, you go on these platforms and you take what you get?
I think you can bring lawsuits that deal with these various legislative provisions. We haven't really figured out how to cabin the idea of the internet, artificial intelligence, all of those things. Our laws are anachronistic. They're way, way behind. In fact, in my book, The Preventive State, I deal with the fact that we don't have a jurisprudence. We don't have laws to engage in prevention of the kind that also prevent free speech. I have a chapter in the book on free speech. Censorship is as old as free speech. As soon as speech was invented, censorship was invented. And what is censorship? It's preventive. It's an attempt to prevent the truth from coming out. And Thomas Jefferson wrote about this, and many of our framers and most important people have written about it. But we haven't figured out yet exactly how much prevention we're entitled to take in order to prevent how much harm. And that applies on the internet. It applies today in the media, and it applies across the board. And that's why it took me so long to write this book. Usually I write books within a year. This one took me a long time to write because I really had to think through about how to create a jurisprudence to stop the preventive state from denying our liberty. It was Benjamin Franklin who said those of us who would deny fundamental liberties in order to secure a little bit of security deserve neither. But in the preventive state, I talk about what if we have to take away a little bit of liberty to prevent a lot of taking away of security. If we could have arrested 5 people improperly and prevented 9/11, or if Israel could have bombed headquarters of Hamas and prevented October 7th, that's a trade-off that's worth it. Take, for example, what's in the news today. Sinwar, Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of the former head of Hamas, but who's now the head of Hamas, was probably killed by an Israeli attack on a hospital. And there were probably 15 or 16 innocent people killed, and 10 terrorists were killed. Is that trade-off worth it? I mean, it was designed to prevent Sinwar and his people from killing more people. And so these are the kinds of trade-offs and judgments that we are worried about now, and we're thinking about that in the context of Iran, in the context, we've made mistakes in Iraq. We're going to make mistakes all the time. If we could have prevented Pearl Harbor or 9/11 by mistakenly arresting a few dozen people, that probably would have been a trade-off that would be worth it. But if it takes thousands of people, the way we detained thousands of people in detention centers just because they were born to Japanese families, that goes much too far. So that's what we need, is a balanced jurisprudence, and that's what I try to do in the preventive state.
Well, who decides that balance? Is it the Congress? Is it the people? How do we, because you know that some people are power hungry, it becomes a snowball, and then that's it. You have no rights, no liberties at all. There's got to be some way to make sure we restrict the level they can go to. Like, we don't go as far as internment camps, How do you do that?
You get the A+ again. You ask the critical question. The critical question in any democracy is who decides. Who decides? Because everybody's going to make mistakes. But if we're going to have mistakes, it's better that those mistakes are made by elected representatives in the legislative branches than by the judiciary. Because we can't cure mistakes made by the Supreme Court. We can cure mistakes made by Congress, gets elected every 2 years, and by the president that gets elected every 4 years. So if you're going to have mistakes, have them be made by elected officials rather than by judges in robes who, in some respects, are really above the law.
It's Professor Alan Dershowitz. Get this book, The Preventive State. I wanted to ask you about the Smith-Mundt Act, if you don't mind. And this was an act that allowed the U.S. government to lie outwardly. You could lie to the rest of the world, but you couldn't lie to the American people. During Obama's term, he changed that. Now the government can lie to the American people, and there's no problem. Do you read that the same way as I do, or am I missing something on Smith-Mundt? Are you familiar with that?
I think you're right. I think that, every government lies to its enemies. Obviously, when you are going to attack a country, you lie to them, you try to deceive them, you try to prevent them from knowing about anything. And sometimes you can lie to your own people temporarily in order to protect national security, but ultimately there shouldn't be any secrets. Ultimately, everything a government does should be open to scrutiny by its own voters and its own people. May not be able to do it this week or this month, but, within a couple of years, everything should be out in the open. And I'm glad that President Trump is making available records on the assassinations of various people over the years. We're entitled to know, did the CIA play an improper role? I was offered a job working on the Warren Commission by the Chief Justice. I was a law clerk in the Supreme Court at the time. And my Justice, Arthur Goldberg, said, Alan, don't take the job, because no matter what the evidence is, they're going to conclude that the Soviet Union had nothing to do with it in order to prevent World War III, which is a commendable goal. But I didn't want to serve on a commission that had a predetermined result. And so I didn't serve on the commission. Two of my friends did, and they both came away concluding that the answer was probably the right answer, but the process was a deeply flawed process.
It's Professor Alan Dershowitz. A couple of minutes left with him. Thank you so much for the time. Get the book called The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. I wonder, as we're watching all of this work out, well, actually, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up a couple of things. You brought up Epstein earlier. You've already gone on the record with me on my show about Epstein. Everybody deserves to have representation, no matter how good or bad the person happens to be. That's what the relationship was, right?
Was his lawyer, and I represented him. And as soon as the case was over, I had no contact with him at all. And the woman who falsely accused me ultimately admitted, after all these years, that she may have mistaken me, confused me, misidentified me. And I proved conclusively beyond any doubt that I never met her, couldn't have been with her. I've had no sexual contact with anybody other than my wife during the entire time I knew Jeffrey Epstein, which is why I wrote an immediate op-ed in the Wall Street Journal the day I was accused, saying, if that FBI investigate me, I waive all my rights. Please investigate me. I have nothing to hide. And why I want all the secrets to be revealed. I want every document to be revealed, every videotape to be revealed, because I know they will all prove my innocence.
What I hate is that those who attacked you did not back off and apologize and do an about face. You know what? Dershowitz didn't do any of this stuff. They wanted to take you out, as you said earlier, because you were involved with Trump. O.J. Simpson is now passed. You still believe that he was innocent, or does that matter?
Never said he was innocent. Never once in my life did I say he was innocent. What I said is the police planted evidence against him. They planted a sock on which they poured blood from test tubes. So I never made any claim about his innocence or guilt. I did claim that it's not proper to convict somebody based on tampered evidence. And there are still cases now that I'm involved in. I'm a specialist in challenging the government misconduct when they tamper with evidence. So I'm, proud of the role I played in the O.J. Simpson case, but I'm not here to tell you that he did or didn't do it.
I want to fall on my sword because you gave me an A+ the entire interview. I didn't mean innocent. Do you still believe that there's a chance he was not guilty? I know that the jury found him not guilty. I don't know that we're innocent until proven guilty. I did not mean to put words in your mouth. So let me backtrack a little bit. Do you still feel confident in the jury finding?
I do, because the jury concluded that based on the evidence in the case, there was a reasonable doubt, and the reasonable doubt was caused by the fact that the police planted some evidence, and therefore you couldn't trust the totality of the evidence. But, would I hire him to be be his friend, or no? I mean, I won't vouch for him as a person. I won't vouch for almost any of my clients. I don't pick my clients really any more than an emergency room doctor picks his patients. I represent the most guilty, the most horrible. And, the vast majority of Americans charged with crime are guilty. And thank God for that. Would we want to live in a country where the majority of people charged with crime are innocent? That's no. China, but it's not the United States of America.
The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. Alan Dershowitz is the author. He's given us all this amazing time. Alan, I'm going to ask it. Who's a better lawyer, Ted Cruz or Jamie Raskin?
They're very different. They're very, very different. Ted Cruz has this immediate ability to respond to almost anything. He has one of the quickest minds that I know of. Jamie Raskin is a deep thinker and goes deeper, I think. But they were both wonderful to have in class. I also had, Elena Kagan was in my class. Mike Pompeo was in my class. I've had, I think, 10 senators in my classes. So, but I'm not responsible for any of their views because I never taught them what to think. I only taught them how to think, and I'm proud of their intelligence, though I disagree with many of their conclusions.
You did an amazing job with all of them. Go get this book right now, The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. It is Professor Alan Dershowitz. Go and check him out on The Dersh Show. Go to dersh.substack.com. I can't thank you enough for taking the time today and always being so nice to come on my show, Professor. Let's do it again very soon. Anything I can do for you, let me know, okay?
I appreciate it. And I can't wait to come back on your show because you always ask me the hardest questions, and you're so probing, and your fans and your listeners should be so pleased to have you as somebody who dissects the news and analyzes everything. So keep doing great things. What you do is so important.
That means the world to me, Professor. Thank you so much. We appreciate you stopping by Unshaken and Unafraid with Joe Pag, special guest Alan Dershowitz. Another one's going to drop very soon. Have a great one.